welcome to another Lewisburg Community TV video. This is episode 16. It's still August and it's summer and we've been very busy, so we have a lot of videos backing up. We're glad to say a lot of authors have sent us videos and supported what we're doing, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
And today we've got two Hogans, Faith Hogan and Caelainn Hogan. We'll go over to those in a moment. That's Faith and Caelainn. Yeah, so we'll pop over to them in a moment. So first off, you started reading one of our other authors who is featured on our Tertulia TV, The Truth Must Dazzle Gradually, Helen Cullen. I did a lovely interview with Helen. Some time back we were talking about the last letters of William Woolf, which sounds brilliant, and this is her latest book, which has just come out this week, so we have a copy at home and we're reading that.
Well, this is on my list now, so I'm going to start reading it. This is also our book of the month, our new book of the month.
Yeah, and I think for now we'll probably go over to one of our videos. So Faith Hogan, what happened to us, actually came into the shop and we have a lovely interview with Faith. Faith is also Ger Hogan. And Faith lives locally in Caelainn, so it was really nice to meet her and really nice to hear about what she's got to say. So we'll go over to Faith and all will be revealed. Hello, Geraldine. Welcome to Tertulia.
So nice to be here. It really is.
Thank you. And you're coming to us from, it's Caelainn you live in, is it? Did I get that right? Yes. So yeah, you're very welcome. It's, as we said, it's summer, it's August, it's very busy in Westport, and we managed to get your books finally. In fact, before it even came out, someone came in and was demanding where was the latest book by Ger Hogan, and then I got very confused with the Faith and the Ger. Anyway, we got them, which is brilliant. So I suppose before we go into your latest book, I thought it'd just be nice to hear a little bit about you. Like I was just writing a list from your profile, and you seem to have everything. So you've done English literature and psychology, which is amazing. You work within the intellectual disability area, and you're a mother of 4 children, and you live in the west of Ireland. So I suppose, what was your, why did you start wanting to write? Was it from your, I suppose it was from your English lit degree, but
possibly. I suppose I always wrote.
Yeah.
So even before I took on English literature, when I left school, first of all, I did marketing in Dublin, and that finished. It wasn't for me. But I always loved English, and I always loved writing, and I always loved reading, and I always loved bookshops.
Me too.
So I suppose, yeah, signs are on it.
Yeah.
But and I always wrote, and then about when I went on maternity leave with my first child in 2000, my first twins, in 2002, I started to write what became a novel. It was a crime novel. My first foray into a long piece of fiction was in crime. And I fiddled with that for quite a while, and by the time that my third maternity leave came up, my 4th child, I kind of was ready to send it somewhere at that point in time, and I was writing crime and had my heart set on crime, and that book did the rounds and secured me a really nice agent, a really good agent that I really wanted, but it never really hit home with publishers. It had nice feedback. And my agent at the time would have been representing quite an array of more contemporary fiction. So she would have represented Kate Atkinson and Lisa Jewell and writers like that were kind of really making names themselves on the women's fiction front and contemporary fiction. And she suggested, why don't you try something different?
She said sort of diplomatically.
And so I hadn't really, I suppose, like everybody else, I had read Maeve Binchy and Rosamund Pilcher and all of those great writers before. But I never really tried to write anything like that. I kind of didn't know where to start, because I had spent the vast majority of my life reading crime.
Reading and writing.
Reading and
writing.
Crime.
Okay.
Yeah, mainly crime was what I kind of wrote and read. And so I tried, and I sat down and I thought, I'm not going to, how? Where to start? And I wrote my first women's fiction book, My Husband's Wives, and it was picked up. And from there, we ended up signing 2 book deals, and my last book deal I signed last year with Aria Fiction, and in the meantime we managed to find a home for the crime books. So that's kind of how the crime books were published by Book Couture in 2019. So.
Yes, that's why I was getting confused. Yes, when I was looking you up. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
So they were published as Caelainn Hogan.
Yes, Geraldine Hogan. Yes.
And when I started writing first of all the women's fiction books, contemporary fiction books, the publisher came and said, really, I'm not so sure about Caelainn Hogan. It's quite a long name, and it was meant to be a digital first deal. And she felt that when you type in Caelainn Hogan on Amazon, there's a good chance that you're going to put something wrong. It's quite a long name. And she suggested maybe going for a different name. And at the time, my agent, they had suggested names like Kate or Amanda or something kind of easy. And I just, at home, I said, we'll have a pick, we'll have a draw, we'll do a draw. So we had Faith and we had Kate and we had Amanda, and we had at the time Rapunzel, because Rapunzel was a big name in our house at the time. And thankfully Faith came out of the basket, and I've ended up in Faith.
And it is easy. It's easy to remember. It's easy to spell.
Yeah.
Everyone knows it. Yeah.
It is, and I think it's been a good name in terms of getting the books out there, and sort of just in terms of I suppose they talk about, when you're starting off, they talk about making a brand.
Yes.
And that's kind of been the brand, so that's kind of where we're at. So that's why there's the two names.
Yes. Yeah. Good. And so this book, what happened to us? So actually, this is so it's set in Dublin to start with. And I was trying to figure out, is that Connell Bridge, or it's not? It's one of the other bridges, isn't it? Further along.
It's further along.
It's further along, yes. Further along. And I love that, the way she's sitting there. So you start with, well, it's Kevin and Carrie. And sort of, how did you develop those characters, or?
They were great fun to write.
Yeah.
It's very different to all of my other Faith Hogan books in that it's, I suppose, number one, it's a two-hander book. All of the others have sort of a series of characters that sort of run into each other, collide, and then divide and collide again. That one kind of started, I wanted to write something that was different. I wanted to write something that, I kind of thought I'd write something romantic, but I'm not so sure that a relationship splitting up is very romantic. But it came together in a way that I suppose I didn't expect, and I was very happy with it at the end of it. I liked the idea of Carrie kind of winning out in the end. I kind of also liked the idea of Kevin getting his comeuppance in the end. So that's kind of it. It's maybe not a romantic book, but certainly there's a lot of love in there. Yeah,
it's interesting you say that, because I haven't finished it yet, but you get that sense. It does feel kind of romantic, actually, now that you say it, even though it obviously isn't, because it starts off, I mean, we're not ruining it, it starts off with a breakup.
It does.
And I like that,
It's a journey, maybe more so than a romance. It turned into it, but I suppose you write you don't always write what you want to write. Sometimes you write what's kind of meant to be written. They sort of, and very much Carrie very much made her own path in that book, and so did Kevin. In some ways, their personality sort of demanded that the events would unfold in certain ways, and so sometimes you don't always write what you want to write, what you set out to write. No,
and I suppose as a reader, it resonates straight away. Like when I picked it up, there's something resonates about it. It's about that things finishing in life and being forced to do something else, and I think we've all experienced that, or if we haven't, we will do at some stage. So thank you, that's lovely. And you said you've got plans, you're doing other stuff, or you've got another one coming out?
So at the moment, lockdown has been funny. It's been rather a strange time. What happened to us was meant to come out in March of this year.
Yes.
And that was changed to April, and then it was changed to July. And it was meant to be, I have another book that I really loved writing, and it's called Place We Call Home. And that came out at the beginning of this year, and that was due for publication in September this year. And that book is very much a local book. It's set around the Willow Mills. And it's very much a story of family, rather than not a romance, not a romance, if you know what I mean. But that's meant to come out next year as a paperback. But in the meantime, I had written another book called The Ladies' Midnight Swimming Club, and that will come out.
That sounds interesting as well. The Ladies' Midnight Swimming Club. Yeah. Oh, I like that.
So that is due to come out in paperback and in ebook next April, I think it is.
So it's finished, and it's finished.
So we're actually just editing it now. I've got a second round of edits to come back to me this month, and I'm in the process of starting the next book. I won't say I've written it, because it's definitely not written, but it'll be something similar. And again, I've really only written, I haven't written a set of Ballycove books, but this will be the third book in in a series of books that are set in one fictional village in the west of Ireland. And Ballycove, in my imagination, runs somewhere between Eastkey in North County Sligo, right back to kind of Ballycastle on the northwest of Mayo. So that will be next year. We will see what happens then.
Oh, well, we look forward to that, Geraldine and Faith.
And Faith.
Thank you, and thanks for sharing your story with us, and we'll hear some more from you, I hope, very soon.
Thank you very much.
You.
It's lovely to be here.
Thanks very much, Faith. That was really lovely, and we're selling a few of these books, so they're available in the shop right now. And she signed all the copies. Thank you.
And this week, then, I suppose, what have I been reading?
Yes, read.
I am still reading Girl, Woman, Other. I think I did mention that last time. I am. Yeah, and I'm reading a non-fiction book, which I was last time too. They're my 2 holiday reads. I'm still reading them, The Passage to Europe. But there's a couple of books that have come in that I'm dying to read, and I've chosen them for myself, really, and hopefully I'll get to read them. This is from the Nobel Prize winner, Olga, I can't say your name, Olga Tokarczuk. I have read some stuff of hers essays, not this book though. So it's Drive Your Plough Over Bones of the Dead, and it's supposed to be absolutely amazing. So that's in the shop. Also, another one which I'm dying to read is Philosophies of India, written by a art historian, Henrik Zimmer, and he breaks the book down into 3 apparently. So he talks about the highest good, looking at Eastern and Western philosophy and where they intersect, the philosophies of time, and the philosophies of eternity. So that is just actually my favourite book, probably, which I need to get on and read.
It's a bit of a monster.
It's a bit of a monster, but it's something I think you dip in and out of. So they're 2 gorgeous books in the shop for this week, and we've lots of other ones, of course. So now we're going to go over to Caelainn Hogan, who I don't believe is related to Faith at all. I don't think there's anything between them. The Republic of Shame. So it's stories from Ireland's institutions and women's stories from Ireland's institution, and Caelainn's absolutely gorgeous, and she's going to take us through that. So over to Caelainn.
Hi, my name is Caelainn Hogan. I'm the author of Republic of Shame. This is the new paperback that's out this month, published by Penguin. Thanks to Tertulia Books for the opportunity to do this reading. The book is about the religious-run institutions in Ireland and their ongoing legacy. And I'm going to read 2 short extracts. The first is about a woman who had a son the same year that I was born, and she was sent to a mother and baby home in Dublin. On a scorching July afternoon, the sky unexpectedly blue. My friend Ruth sat on a garden deck with a black sarong wrapped over her head, the table behind strewn with empty bottles from the night before. I was telling her about the stories people had been sharing with me when she cut me off. Did you not know my mum was adopted? I did not know, and so she told me. Her mother, Claire, was born to an unmarried woman and adopted by a married couple who lived in Blackrock, not far from where I grew up. As a child, Ruth remembered going to visit her mother's adoptive parents, strictly religious people in a lavish house. Claire's parents had another adoptive daughter, Gina. Claire always knew she was adopted, and it was made out to be something special. But that came with expectations, questions about identity that couldn't be voiced, and shame. Ruth told me that her Aunt Gina became pregnant out of wedlock and gave birth in a mother and baby home in 1988, the same year I was born. With Ruth's permission, I contacted Gina, acutely conscious that if my own mother's circumstances had been slightly different, she could have ended up in the same position. Gina told me that she was born in Castle Pollard in 1966 to an unmarried woman from Offaly. She was 22 years old, and when she became pregnant herself, and in denial with a capital D, when her sister Claire, Ruth's mother, came home from being away in the US. She took one look at me and said, "You're pregnant. Your tits are huge. Get yourself to a doctor." Claire told their parents about Gina's pregnancy over tea. Later, their mother confronted Gina. "I believe you're thinking of starting a family," she said. Her adoptive mother, whose brother was a priest, arranged for her to stay at Denny House in Donnybrook. She didn't know anything about mother and baby homes. I didn't know these places existed. I felt I was being punished. She had to hand in her notice at the office where she worked. Denny House was a posh one, she told me. nice compared to what other girls went through, made to remain in the institutions for years sometimes, and forced to work. The matron in charge dressed all in grey and was very strict. The other women were mainly from the inner city. Gina, a middle-class girl who had attended Sign Hill, a school run by Dominican nuns, was viewed in a different light, and the matron took her under her wing. Counselling was provided by the Catholic Crisis Pregnancy Agency Cura. Gina was at Denny House for 2 months before giving birth and 2 months after. She had to do chores, cleaning out the fireplace and hoovering the floors, but it wasn't the worst place. When her labour started, an ambulance was called. A cousin of hers came to the hospital, but her mother stayed away. The matron at the hospital said, "Here's a girl who sleeps with every Tom, Dick, or Harry." Other women's husbands were there with them on the ward. I was the only one who didn't have anyone, she told me. When her mother came to visit, she brought a big salmon to thank Gina's cousin for being with her. I remembered my mum telling a story of how my dad insisted she cook a whole salmon for my christening party, worried about impressing the family. In middle-class South Dublin in the late 1980s, it seems, a big fish was an antidote to illegitimacy. Gina's mother and her uncle, the priest, advised her to get the baby adopted, but her sister Claire urged her to keep the baby and said that she would help. Gina was determined to keep her son. Afterwards, her father would tell her he was glad, but her mother didn't offer her any support, and she was no longer welcome in their home. A friend from school helped her sort a kind of flat. It was a garage off a house with a hole in the floor. At one stage, she used a cinder block as a chair. It was an awful place to bring a baby, she told me, but it was all she could afford. A 5-minute drive away, her parents lived in a house with an extra kitchen, bedroom, and sitting room upstairs, renovated for Gina's grandparents. She worked various jobs, and her father would slip her a few quid when he could, saying not to tell her mother. Social welfare and rent allowance made it just about possible to get by. Her son was a live wire in a tiny space. When the boy was 3 years old, Gina's parents suggested that it wasn't too late. She could still put him up for adoption. And so the second extract that I'm going to read is about Tuam, which I think is the way many of us first came to know about the mother and baby homes, at least the death rates inside these institutions. And 2 years ago, the government decided that it was going to excavate the mass grave in Tuam and promised that it would try to identify the remains. And families are still waiting for that to happen. The ground still hasn't been broken. So this was written the day after that. The day after, I took the bus to Tuam. The trees were already stripped and hungry looking in the disappearing sun, the long lines of low stone walls blotched with lichen. I noticed new housing developments on the edge of the town and thought of families moving here. An Eastern European man had told me that before he moved to Tuam for work, he Googled the place, and the first thing that came up were news stories about hundreds of children buried in an unmarked grave. In the empty field beside the Tuam Co-op livestock market, a lone donkey lay on its side. The car park of the cathedral was packed with schoolboys in navy blazers, some sucking at cigarettes against a wall. Girls in long school skirts and jumpers milled around on the other side. Beside the Presentation Sisters Convent, I started up a conversation with an 86-year-old nun who was wrapped up in a deep pink scarf and rain jacket, a walking stick in hand, though she stood very straight and steady. I asked her if she was from Tuam. "Not for long, I'll be dead soon," she told me. I asked her if she had heard the news about the exhumation of the burial site and whether she remembered the home. "We were enclosed, we wouldn't have known," she said. "Terrible, them buried on top of each other like that. We hear a lot about it nowadays." I wanted to speak to people living on the estate about how they felt now the decision had been made. I had a rough map that Teresa Killeen-Kelly had drawn for me on a scrap of paper in her office, directing me to a woman's house backing onto the burial site. Teresa didn't even tell me the woman's name, just told me to go to the house. I was wearing a bright yellow rain jacket and felt very much like the outsider I was, back in this place to take advantage of their news. Tight-knit communities must be wonderful in many ways, I thought, until you fall out of the fold. A man on his couch seemed to lock eyes on me as I passed his window. I walked until I reached the house indicated on the map. A woman answered the door in her dressing gown. She was not expecting visitors, but she invited me into her living room and sat me on her couch. Her name was Caelainn. She pointed out the window between her shimmery pink drapes to the surviving segment of the institution's old stone wall. Anytime she sat here watching TV, it was lurking out there, a remnant of the dark past. On the other side of the house, the wall ran between her garden and the burial site itself. There was a crack in it, and she believed that as soon as the digging started, it was likely to collapse. Caelainn grew up on the estate and went to school with children from the home. The Mercy sisters used to punish her for talking to them, but it didn't stop her. We used to get beaten for talking to the home children, she told me. There were 2 girls she remembered. They were always made to sit at the back of the class and didn't have uniforms. They all wore the same brown coats. They did treat them different, she said, as if they were dirt. The children were told not to speak to them. In the summer, the nuns would put some of the cots outside and they could see the Caedines from the street. She was madly curious to see inside the place, beyond the walls, but when they were caught looking in, she said a caretaker would close the gate or scare them away. It was sinful to look at the small ones, she said. They were so wasted away it made her feel uneasy. A few people apparently found bones while digging in their gardens at various times over the past decades. Not chicken bones either, she said. Most of them just reburied what they found without thinking too much of it. Unlike some residents of the estate, Caelainn believed the ground should be dug up and the bodies of the children accounted for if possible. They should have been buried properly, she stressed. Her face had become strained and there was anger in her voice. Out through her kitchen we walked to the garden, the sky filled with crows. At the end of the garden there was a big gate like the type you see on farms, with long fat rungs you can climb over. Beyond that was the entrance to the memorial garden. On a nice day, Caelainn didn't feel she could sit out with a cup of tea anymore, or have people around to enjoy the garden. She would be worried what people would say. Along the side of the old wall, she brought me to a spot that didn't seem marked in any way, but which she clearly knew from memory. My dog is buried there, she said. They won't be digging there. That was her only demand, her red line. When they buried the dog, they made sure not to go down too far, worried about what might be brought up. After I left Caelainn's house, I walked along the lane that passes beside her garden, opened the little gate and entered the odd-shaped patch of land that was to be excavated. On my previous visits, it had been boarded up, and this was the first time I could step inside. The smell of turf smoke was in the air and the light was fading. I counted out steps along the edges of the area, 20 steps along the wall perpendicular to the boundary along Caelainn's house. 17 steps along the wall that separated the memorial garden from the children's playground. There were flowers laid at the foot of the Virgin Mary in the far corner, along with rosary beads, snow globes, and angel figurines. Later, walking away from the burial ground, I met a young man with a neck tattoo, sitting in his car. He told me that the children should be left there. His friend remembered when famine bodies had been dug up on a nearby corner. He claimed to have photos on an old phone. As I left the estate, another lanky young man in a grey tracksuit, holding a can of beer in one hand, stopped me. I asked him about the children's remains, and he said he thought what the nuns did was wrong. Then he asked, "Are you single? Are you on Snapchat?"
Thanks, Caelainn. We have this available in the shop as well, so and we also have the paperback version, which we've just sold out, but we'll be ordering again very soon.
Yeah, and thanks to Helen, who came on the shop before, Helen Cullen, and to Faith for her lovely interview and sharing her time and coming to visit us. And yeah, we're putting all our books up on the website.
Mm-hmm.
We are in the process of that. So if there's anything you want just to let us know, to email us or send a request on the website, we'll find every book. And all of these books will be going up there in the next couple of weeks. So that's it for this week for episode 16.
And we see you so very soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.